Cafe Victoria with Bruce Williams on CFAX 1070.
And we are broadcasting once again live today from Nanaimo, where the Island Economic Summit is taking place. Whole bunch of things are going to be announced here today. The Premier, Christy, is going to go on stage here at 12:40 today and make some announcements that you may have heard a little bit about. There's going to be some improvements done on the Malahat and an LNG update as well. I actually did an interview with the Premier that ended about 20 minutes ago, and in the interview with me, she actually announced what she's going to announce to the public in about a half an hour on stage. So we'll have that interview for you coming up shortly as well. One of the things that's going on here at this Economic Summit is an ongoing conversation about different sectors of our economy, one of which, of course, is transportation, because we live on an island. Transportation's a big deal. One of the guys who, of course, is right in the hub of all that is the man who is the CEO of BC Ferries. He's Mike Corrigan, and he's with me now. Michael, how are you?
I'm great, Bruce.
You were part of a session this morning that was talking about transportation with some other folks. Tell me how that went.
I thought it went extremely well. There were a lot of different folks there. The gentleman that runs the Nanaimo Airport, a fellow running the Port Alberni Port Authority, and then one of our competitors, C-SPAN Ferries, that competes in the commercial trailer business with us.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the diversity within BC Ferries in a couple of minutes. We're not going to talk about compensation. We're not going to be talking about all the stuff that has been taking the headlines as of late, because there are other elements of BC Ferries that we all need to understand. It's a holistic thing. It's a holistic operation. I want to do a declaration off the top that I have a bit of an affiliation with BC Ferries. I moderate the annual general meeting, for which I'm paid, actually, to do it. It's a small amount of money, but I'm paid to do that. So I just want to declare that. But it has no bearing on the relationship that I have with BC Ferries and with you, Mike. But I do want to talk about the diversity of your business, because as if any good business, and as we talk about at an economic summit, you have your core business, but you have other things that help you basically make more money, be more efficient. And BC Ferries is doing a lot of that.
Yeah, obviously the bricks and mortar part of the business is moving passengers and vehicles back and forth across the water, and I think we do that as efficiently as anybody in the world. And if you can read the Ferry Commissioner's report, and he talks about things like that. But where we've tried to drive revenue and outside of traffic growth, is in a number of areas. Commercial services, the drop trailer business I was speaking of earlier.
Yeah, so what drop trailer? Let's explain what that is.
Essentially, we try to replicate what C-SPAN does with their tug and barge services, and because we have ferries, it's virtually sail at 50% capacity. There's lots of opportunities and lots of space on the ferry to do other things. So we've been able to attract commercial customers, people that are moving goods and services back and forth from Vancouver to Vancouver Island, been able to attract them onto the ferry, providing a drop trailer business, which is, we call it a virtual drop trailer business, because we own the actual units that transport the rigs onto the ferry. Yeah, the trailers onto the ferry, and we hire obviously drivers to do that. But the incremental cost for us is fairly insignificant, because the fixed cost of running the ferry back and forth is virtually the same, whether a Spirit class vessel sails with 2,200 or 2,000 passengers. Essentially, we have the same number of crew, need to have the same amount of fuel, and so on and so forth.
So a truck pulls up, comes to the ferry terminal, goes to Swartz Bay, and it's heading for wherever the destination is, somewhere in Tsawwassen. So buddy that's driving the truck pulls up, gets out of the truck. Then what happens?
Well, what happens is the commercial carrier would transport their rig to our facility, their trailer to our facility, and leave it with us, and then we would put it in a compound and then hostel it on and off our ferry. So when people are on the ferry traveling back and forth, they'll see some rigs that have or units that have BC Ferries logos on them, and those are our units, and those are our drivers. But the content of of what they're carrying is there's a customer. And basically what the customer wants is to be able to move the goods and services back and forth across the water as efficiently as possible.
It's cheaper.
It is, and the business for us is it's going to generate net income this year of almost $7 million, and that goes to offset the cost of providing ferry service to everyone else. So essentially, if we were to get out of that service, what we would see is an increase in the cost and in the fares going forward. So it's to everybody's benefit that we're in these type of services. services.
Yeah, BC Ferries CEO Mike Corrigan is with us on CFAX 1070. We're in Nanaimo at the Economic Summit. Something that we actually have discussed on this program in the past, but BC Ferries Vacations is another sort of division of the company that's come along. Because when you look at bundling of holidays, if you're going to fly to the Caribbean, you get a hotel and you get a flight and you get a car, or going to Palm Springs or something and all that stuff, you're kind of getting into that business now. So tell me about that.
It's a venture we opened up a couple of years ago. We have a travel center in downtown Vancouver. It was fairly confrontational on the front end. Obviously, people are saying, "What is BC Ferries doing in the travel services business? You should be just go back and forth and carry customers. You are a monopoly. Why do you have to be in that part of the business?" But we see it as an opportunity to do a number of things, and it's become quite successful for us, and is contributing positively to the bottom line and helping offset costs as well as the commercial business does. So what essentially we do is we package ferries with hotels and other types of services on Vancouver Island and on the Gulf Islands and even on the Sunshine Coast, and we give people a reason to travel on the ferry and come to Vancouver Island. And our biggest potential market is the Lower Mainland, and what we've learned is people on the Lower Mainland have a lot of choices when they get up every day and they decide where they're going to go on vacation or go away for the weekend, and Vancouver Island is just one of those choices. Seattle's another one where they can spend their high-priced Canadian dollar and get good bang for their buck down there. They can go across the border and get on a cheap flight to the desert. They can go over to the interior. So there's a lot of options that are available to people, and we want to make sure people are aware that a great option is coming to Vancouver Island or one of the Gulf Islands and experiencing not only the ferries but everything else that you would expect. And we offer 70 packages right now like that.
Yeah, I mean, diversity in the business case is what we're talking about here with Mike Corrigan, the CEO of BC Ferries. At that annual general meeting, you give a president's report all the time, a CEO's report. And a part of that is accounting for the things that are running well. There's the things that aren't running well that a lot of people jump on and complain about. You've got a bit of a target on your back wherever you go, and people make a point of that stuff. But BC Ferries are very safe.
We have an outstanding safety record, and we're getting safer every year. We built a program with our union called SailSafe, and I think both parties are very proud of that, and it's really driven on the belief that employees are the ones who come up with the safety improvements and the best practices. And so it's really about engaging our employees in the business, and we've seen our safety record improve considerably. In fact, injuries are down about 50% at BC Ferries over the last 5 years, and we're seeing even better numbers again this year, and that's on the workplace safety side, and also on the operational safety. We're getting safer all the time too through bridge resource management programs we're putting in. We've got simulators. We're world class as it relates to simulator and simulator training, standardized education and training across the entire fleet. So we're spending more dollars every year on safety and training programs, and we're seeing the payback in terms of savings rate across the system, which actually helps keep fares down over the long term.
And that safety training is all there just in case you need it. It's not that there are always emergencies or circumstances, but your people need to be there to be able to respond all the time, which is why it's a pretty safe bet to take a ferry.
Well, absolutely. The minimum crew that's really needed operationally to sail a big vessel like a Spirit-class vessel or a Coastal-class vessel is probably somewhere between 13 and 15 or 17. All the additional crew on that vessel, and it could be up to 45, 50 crew, is there for Transport Canada purposes in terms of that's their requirement to be able to provide safe operations in the case of an emergency, whether it's a fire or a need to abandon ship or whatever it is. And we all know that's a highly unlikely situation. So that crew has to be there, and they have to be well trained. We do a number of emergency on the water type of
drills
and things like that, and we I think we respond to like 70 emergencies a year on the water, so it's a big number, and every day we're responding to medical emergencies on our vessels where people have heart attacks and strokes and things of that nature. So we are first responders in most cases.
And we hear about that too, that a BC ferry was diverted to assist a vehicle in distress, not a vehicle, a watercraft in distress of some kind. But when you take a look at it, the people that work in the restaurant part and in the gift shop and everything, they're all fully trained up. up. So if they're going to be there and they're going to be trained for safety reasons to be on the ship, might as well give them another job.
Absolutely, and that's what we're doing. We're driving about $75 million in a revenue right now from the additional crew that needs to be on the vessel, and so we provide the food and retail services. And we hear a lot of people say, well, if you want to cut your costs, just, I don't want a hamburger, or I don't want a buffet, I don't even need a gift shop, just give me bare bone service. Well, the fact of the matter is, we would still have the same number of crew on the vessel and basically still have the same cost, but we wouldn't have the benefit of recovering $75 million in revenue from our food and retail and beverage operations. And I don't think what a lot of people realize is I think we're the fifth largest restaurateur in British Columbia. So
really?
that's a big business unto itself. Obviously, our primary business is running ships back and forth as efficiently as we can and safely as we can, but the food, retail, and catering business is a big part of what we do.
I'm just curious about how many opportunities you have outside of that agenda at the AGM to have this conversation that we're having. Like, how often does somebody say, Mike, let's talk about the good stuff? Because there's so many other things that get in the way of that.
Well, I think I have the conversation all the time. Dinner parties, in the dressing room with the guys when I play hockey on Thursday night. When I have coffee with people stop me on the street and they say, Mike, I just want to let you know what a great job I think you guys are doing over there at Ferries. And I've realized part of it is that we're always going to be in the media and we're going to be a lightning rod for certain things. And you got to take that with a grain of salt and move on. We provide service, critical service to 750,000 people on Vancouver Island, the Sunshine Coast, and in the Gulf Islands, and they can't get on and off the islands with a vehicle without our service. So we're always going to be a big part of the dialogue and the discussion as it relates to service. And the challenge around fares is an interesting one, but as I was saying in the session this morning, and I said at the annual public meeting, is we are the service provider. Our job is to run the service as safely and efficiently as we can. We have a 60-year contract with government that defines what the service levels will look like, and government tells us what they'll pay us to provide those services on some of the routes that require a contribution. So the decision around service levels and service fees is always going to be a government policy discussion, and that's where it gets a bit tricky sometimes, is people will say, well, why don't you just cut back service, or why don't you add more service, or why don't you do this, or you do that. And the challenge we have is we have a very restricted contract there. So what I have to try to do is run the places as safely and efficiently as I can, and keeping in mind that about 95% of our costs are fixed costs. The cost to run big vessels back and forth are virtually the same regardless of the number of vehicles and passengers that are on those ships. So that's the challenge going forward.
Within the business model, too, we had something that came up through media where one of the NDP MLAs, Claire Trevena, took a ride on a Washington ferry system and came back here and compared the two. It really is apples and oranges because of the way that the major routes subsidize the smaller routes here. Washington, it's not the same model. I'm not an opinionated guy, and I don't express them on the air, but I don't think she made a fair comparison.
Well, it is apples to oranges. I guess the commonality is we're both big ferry systems. It kind of stops there in a lot of ways. There's three big differences I would suggest. The first one is the complexity of the service that we provide versus Washington State Ferries. They're short run, high volume, big ship commuter services. We provide that service, a little bit longer runs on the major routes, which are hugely profitable, but then we also provide services to all the Gulf Islands and up and down the coast from Port Hardy to Prince Rupert, and I can't remember the numbers, but in terms of the miles that we sail versus Washington State Ferries, it's a factor of, I think, at least 10, the differential. Wow. So if you take that into consideration, that's one difference, the complexity of the service. The second issue is crewing levels. Transport Canada crewing levels for ships are much different than at Washington State Ferries, where they're regulated by the Coast Guard. As an example, a Spirit-class vessel, which may require a minimum crew of 44, a comparable vessel down in Washington State will be about 16 to 18 crew.
Wow!
So that's almost 3 times as much crew, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to take all those things into consideration, and then that has a compounding effect in terms of why we're in the food services business, right? As I was speaking earlier, if you're going to have the crew, we got to cover those costs. And the last big difference between BC Ferries and Washington State Ferries is the full cost of running BC Ferries is contained within BC Ferries. All the services that we provide, the overheads, we raise debt on the debt market. That's all there. It's transparent. At Washington State Ferries, it's a sub-function of a department. So a lot of the costs like payroll, benefits, IT, those things, that's covered off in a central department of government and not allocated to Washington State. So the full cost of running that ferry service isn't really transparent to the taxpayers of Washington State versus in BC Ferries, people know the exact cost of running the ferry service.
Yep, sure do. CEO of BC Ferries, Mike Corrigan, is our guest on CFAX 1070. Mike, I know you have to bolt and get back to Victoria. Can I have 5 more minutes of your time?
Absolutely.
Before you go? Okay, thank you. We're going to give you some quick news headlines here, and then we'll check the weather really fast. We're going to come back and have a conversation continuing here with Mike Corrigan, and the Premier, Christy Clark, will join us here on CFAX 1070 in about 10 minutes.
Where the refills are always free. Cafe Victoria with Bruce Williams on CFAX 1070.
We are broadcasting from the Economic Summit, the State of the Island Economic Summit presented by the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance in Nanaimo. Premier Christy Clark is about to make an announcement on stage here. I recorded an interview with her about an hour ago, so we're going to hear exactly from her what she's going to be saying live in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, Mike Corrigan is with me. He is the CEO of BC Ferries. Just a couple of more minutes, Mike, because I know you have to go. Conversation has been floating around for a couple of weeks about the number of terminals in place here in Nanaimo where we are right now. There's 3 of them. There's the Gabriola Terminal, there's Duke Point, and there's Departure Bay. And there had been some talk that to direct efficiencies in a certain direction, one of these terminals should close. What do you think about that?
Well, I think if it was a greenfields operation, i.e. we were starting ferry service here tomorrow, I mean, we'd look at just having one ferry service into Nanaimo and one terminal. But the reality is we have 3 today, so we have to figure out how we move to that, to something that potentially is more efficient going forward. What I've said, if we talk about the major routes in general, which is Swartz Bay to Tawasin, Departure Bay to Horseshoe Bay, and Duke Point to Tawasin. If you talk about those 3 routes, first of all, those are the high volume routes. They're the money-making routes when you look at all 3 of them together. I've said for some time now that at Ferries we probably don't need all 3 of those routes, but we need 2.5 to 2 3/4 of those routes. So the question is, how do we run it most efficiently? And that's what we're looking at over the long term, is how we may be able to do that. And keeping in mind that if you want to know what a full service terminal looks like, go look at Tawasin, which has 5 berths and a full catering and food and retail and passenger service area, or Swartz Bay for that matter. At Swartz Bay, we'd like to do a little bit more on the food and retail and catering side, but I mean that's a full service terminal that has 5 fully functional berths. If you compare that to Departure Bay or Duke Point, what we have there are terminals that are about 60 or 70% of what a Tawasin or a Swartz Bay would be. So when you try to say let's close down one terminal and just operate out of the other one, it's hugely challenging because we don't have enough berths, and each berth costs about $25 million to build. And Duke Point, for example, only has 1 berth. So if we were to put 3 or 4 more berths in there, you can do the math fairly quickly. It gets into the hundreds of millions. Departure Bay, it really only has 2 berths. So we'd have to put a few more berths in there as well, which are challenges. And then there's the whole challenge here in Nanaimo about commercial traffic, and we built Route 30 to drive commercial traffic. It's the commercial pipeline to the island. If you try to drive more commercial traffic down to Departure Bay, that's going to be a challenge unto itself, having all of that heavy equipment coming up and down the roads and ripping them up. So we're looking at it. I think longer term there's some opportunities for efficiencies, restructuring the service, trying to continue to build on that commercial business that's so important to us because it helps provide a lot of the cost contributions that are necessary to run the ferry system. But it's not like everything else at Ferries. There's not a simple solution for it.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, we appreciate your time and your clarity as always. Safe travels.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it.
We'll see you again soon.
Take care.
You bet. Mike Corrigan, CEO and Chief Executive Officer of President and Chief Executive Officer of BC Ferries. We'll take a break and come back. The Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark, is next on CFAX 1070.
Go ahead, pull up a chair. It's Cafe Victoria with Bruce Williams on CFAX 1070.
17 minutes to 1 o'clock right now. We're broadcasting live from the State of the Island Economic Summit in Nanaimo, where today, among people like Mike Corrigan and others, the Premier, Christy Clark, is on site right now at the Vancouver Island Conference Centre, just taking the stage to make a couple of pretty major announcements, one about a for sure project, another about a huge possibility that could change the landscape of the economy on Vancouver Island. I had a chance to sit down with the Premier about an hour ago, so here is sort of a short version of what she's saying live on stage right now, but here is my interview from about an hour ago with the Premier, Christy Clark. Pleasure to welcome Christy Clark, the Honourable Christy Clark, the Premier of British Columbia. How are you?
I am delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me, Bruce.
Thank you. Nice to see you here. So you're here to make an announcement, or two, or three.
Well, we're going to talk about liquefied natural gas, the importance of that for the whole province. I mean, there are two proposals for the island, as you know. One at Elk Falls, at Campbell River, and then one at Port Alberni, which is a little bit farther advanced. But there's all the secondary jobs, engineers, technologists, carpenters,
well, every
you name it.
Plan will represent X number of jobs in the economy and in the community, probably 7 or 8, I would bet.
Exactly. And it's people often, it's a mistake to think of this as a northern project because, you think about just the oil sands in Alberta. Yep. There are 8 companies that are serving on Vancouver Island that are serving the oil sands. So you think, here we are going to be producing the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet, helping wean China off dirtier sources of fuel. Yep. Be the second largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and those companies can be supplied by folks on Vancouver Island. So that's one of the things I'll talk about. Okay. The other thing people might be interested in is the announcement for $15 million of new investment on the Malahat. Make it safer. NASCAR corner, everybody talks about it. We are going to build a median there, and we're going to make sure that we keep people safe. There are too many deaths and too many accidents along that highway, and I am determined to fix it. Okay, Premier Clark, I want to go back to the LNG thing now. So, the Port Alberni plan, and you mentioned Campbell River as well, part of it I assume is to upgrade the port facility to enable that to be upgraded to what it potentially could be because, Port Alberni's had some difficult times. The mills have come and gone. This could be a part of the solution. We're talking a lot of money potentially invested in that community. Oh, it could be huge. I mean, the Petronas investment in British Columbia is $36 billion. With a B. Yeah. So they're going to be, that's securing the upstream rights, which is really the gas in the ground, so securing that, and then piping it across, and then building the facility. And the permanent employment at those facilities is very big. So you've got all the construction jobs, then you've got the energy generation jobs, which could include independent power on the island, and then you've got all the permanent jobs and the port jobs. So, this is a really valuable commodity, and our chances now to export it. That's why companies are talking about making these huge investments.
Yeah. So we're talking about a footprint then in possibly Campbell River, possibly Port Alberni, both places with their own plants. I'm just trying to talk slowly so I can understand this. But if that's the case, both of those places would have a plant and they would have the ability to take advantage of their ports in both places.
That's right. And it's not just an upgrade. It's you have to change the purpose of the port. These LNG export facilities are very unique. So, you think about what's happening in Kitimat and Prince Rupert. Those are going to be, it's pretty much brand new facilities that they're building. So it's not like Kitimat has something that Port Alberni doesn't have. Port Alberni has incredible proximity. So does Campbell River. And that's what's making it so attractive to those potential Korean investors is because it's just, it's right across. And Korea wants to become the natural gas hub for Asia. We want to become the natural gas hub for North America. And so it's a perfect marriage for us.
How in process, I know you can't talk about everything, but how long does this take? How long has this been in discussion? For example, when do these folks pick up the phone and say, hey, Port Alberni, let's talk LNG. When can we start talking about this stuff? Can you tell me that?
I can. The funny thing is, it happened by government standards lightning fast. 2007, the price of gas was so, they hadn't really discovered the shale gas opportunities yet. So we were talking about building an import facility for natural gas up in the Northwest. Well, I became Premier in 2011. I started talking about our jobs plan, thinking about where we would take our jobs plan. And the guys in the ministry said, hey, listen, we've got this natural gas opportunity. Nobody's really talked about it. Yeah. And we cottoned onto that pretty quickly, sent the message out to the world. We wanted to be open for business, attract investment. And so here we are, 2.5 years later, and the president of Malaysia is saying they've already got to final investment decision on their $36 billion investment. We could get final investment decisions next year. So pretty quick, we've moved on. And, we've had to, because the window of opportunity for this will not be open for us forever. We could get beat to the market, and those jobs will be gone for British Columbia.
So this is the State of the Island Economic Summit that's happening here. These are economic developers. These are business owners. These are a bunch of people that can talk about the issues that are crucial in all this happening. But even the Port Alberni people right now are saying, well, yeah, this has been in the works for a while, but we're ready to go. That's a very important factor.
It is. And so the community, the community welcoming it, working with First Nations in the community, and the First Nations there, I know, are really interested in economic development. So that's a big plus as well. And we're going to have to make sure that we are investing in communities as they grow. Community centers, schools. It's been a long time since people on the west coast of the island were talking about growth. Well, guess what? If these projects succeed, there's going to be big growth on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and we're going to have to be making some pretty substantial investments.
Premier Christy Clark is our guest on CFAX 1070. Let's go back to the Malahat announcement, and I know you have to run. So, the Malahat itself is going to be upgraded a little bit. You're putting some more dough into that, so tell me about what's going to be announced.
Well, it's going to be $15 million more dollars into it, in addition to the $8 million we've already spent recently. That's going to include 2.3 kilometers of median barrier on the highway north of Shawinigan Lake Road up to the weather station. And then, it's making sure that section in particular gets looked after, because that's a real safety problem. And then we're going to make sure that we do the improvements to Whitaker Road, Holker Place intersections, and the 1 kilometer southbound passing lane extension that needs to happen. So those are all things that were identified in the plan as priorities by the community. And you know what? People identified those priorities. They were right. We need to fix it, and we're going to get on with it.
Look at you being the broadcaster, handing the microphone back and forth. Good for you. How's it going? If I can just say, you won the election.
I think the outcome of the election that made me, I guess, that was the best for me, was the fact that we got a real mandate for economic development. We got a real mandate from British Columbians who said, we want you to say yes to growth, yes to economic development, yes to our resource sector, forestry, mining, and natural gas, agriculture. And so I feel here we are, the province, I think the government, with the strongest mandate of anyone in the country. And so I made some promises, and I have 4 years to keep them, and I'm going to do it.
Politics aside, but always a factor, the election was very orange on Vancouver Island. Don McRae, Michelle Stilwell did get elected into your caucus, and they are serving right now. Going forward, what would change that, do you think, your party fortunes on Vancouver Island? How could you improve that?
I think keeping our focus on jobs. People in Vancouver Island want jobs. They want a better future for their kids. And if there was one thing that really resonated with people when I spoke to them, it was the idea that we could pay off our debt in the future. And I think that was about this idea that we want to leave the province better than we found it for our kids. We don't want to burden them with decisions that we've made. So that future orientation, that thinking about the next generation, wanting to raise your kids, have them work in the community and stay in the community where they were raised, really resonated with people on the island. So for me, sticking with our jobs focus, being the jobs party, talking about economic growth and putting people to work and opportunities for our kids, I think that's what's going to mean in the next election. People who may not have voted BC Liberal in the past will look at me and our party and say, you know what, I think those guys are on the track we want them to be on.
I was going to ask you who you think is going to be the next NDP leader, but maybe we'll leave that for another time. You're welcome to come back anytime. We appreciate your time today.
It was really my pleasure. It's so nice to be in Nanaimo today. This is a community of people who say, let's figure out how we can fix things. Let's figure out how we can make it better. And so I'm delighted. It's great to be here with you and your audience as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Premier Christy Clark. So the Premier was with us. That same announcement is happening on stage live right now at the Vancouver Island Conference Centre about both the Malahat and the LNG prospect. We're going to take a quick break and come back. That LNG prospect will have a huge impact on Vancouver Island, especially in the community of Port Alberni. The guy that runs that port authority will be with us next on CFAX 1070.
Bringing it to you a la carte. It's Cafe Victoria with Bruce Williams on CFAX 1070.
Ian Jessup is coming up after 1 o'clock. We want to just pick up on what the Premier, Christy Clark, just said here on CFAX 1070, also at a live address going on at the Island Economic Summit here in Nanaimo. So the LNG prospect would involve the community of Port Alberni. The gentleman who runs the Port Authority in Port Alberni is Zoran Knezovic, and he's with me now. How are you, sir?
Good yourself. Thanks for having me.
So if this comes to be, if this whole thing that's been in the works for a while now, that would totally change life in the Alberni Valley.
Absolutely. They provide a huge number, a large number of jobs, and revitalize community, rebuild a road to Banfield, and also bring a lot of economic growth and spin-off effect in the region.
So the Port Authority is affected in a couple of ways. First of all, I would assume that the facility would go within a footprint that you currently manage. Yes. So land touching the water. Any idea where exactly that might be?
So what we have done so far, we have made a map preserve about 750 hectares of land. It's about 30 kilometers from downtown Port Alberni down the canal. So it's within our jurisdiction, and we have isolated area that's between, for locals, it's between Spencer and Coleman Creek area.
Okay, so when this comes along, this is all new structure, using any existing structure, any all new buildings, would it all be done?
It's totally greenfield site. There is nothing there right now. It's just trees, and actually the area for the LNG, it's been logged already right now.
Okay.
So it's almost bare site and ready to be built.
So before this comes to be on the island, though, some of the other areas need to be dealt with. You were saying that Kitimat, Prince Rupert, those places are going to do what they need to do first.
I believe that and it's not necessarily, I'm not necessarily the right person to answer that question. However, as far as my knowledge goes, is I believe that area in northern BC will have to be addressed first and iron out who are the players and who is going to do what. And at that point, we'll see if there is anything left and who is left and whether they want to use Port Alberni for.
So Port Alberni has obviously been shortlisted among a number of communities that were probably considered for this.
That's exactly right. And what we have right now, we have provincial government helping us do industrial suitability study for the LNG facility in Port Alberni, which we expect to be completed in the next couple of weeks.
And there is a site in Campbell River, which I know was the mill at one time, that's also being considered for the same sort of project. Are they in the loop on this conversation too?
I've heard about it, and I'm not sure I don't know the details, to be honest here, and I wouldn't venture to comment on Campbell River in any regard.
I'm not sure who's talking to who, so I thought I'd ask you anyway. But needless to say, a project like that, Port Alberni, let's be honest, has seen better times. The mills that were there shut down quite some time ago. There's still one running, but it's a catalyst mill, and its future is a little bit up in the air as well. Huge game change for Port Alberni should this happen. How big?
Absolutely. For the LNG itself, for what we were told from the prospective proponent, is that they'll create at least 200 jobs on a regular basis when it's up and running. And also thousands of jobs in the construction, bringing the pipeline and creating the LNG export facility and plant and so on and so forth. So, but also revitalize the roadway to Banfield and probably possibly roadway to the Port Alberni as well too. So it's a huge game changer. In a combination with container transshipment, as we were discussing or talking about it earlier, is create a huge impact on whole of Vancouver Island and especially the region too.
I suppose there are some people already lining up to express opposition to this. Have you heard from any of them?
To be honest, not as much. Not as much. People are still sort of trying to digest all of these ideas because nobody sort of expected this much from Port Alberni. So right now it's just, I guess, for lack of a better word, sinking in.
So the timeline then, for next steps?
For the next steps right now, as I mentioned, industrial suitability study will be, for the LNG will be done within the next couple of weeks, and we are embarking on doing the feasibility study for container transshipment, which will be done by the end of March of next year. And after that, if we have a feasible project, of course we'll go and pursue investors to come and build this.
Where can we get more information? Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I'm not emotional. I'm just losing my voice.
I didn't realize that I'm going to have so much effect on you. However, more information is via Port website, also on Twitter. We are on Twitter and don't ask me for the handle, please, because
we'll just search it.
So on the Twitter, and we are also part of, and we are proud to say, part of the Asia Trade Mission. We are going to join Premier Clark on her Asia Trade Mission
to China
and Korea and Japan, and hopefully we'll be able to share more information as we move on.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.